The clock read 8:42 a.m. as Kendrick Robinson pulled into the municipal courthouse parking lot in Greenville, South Carolina. The morning sun spilled across the asphalt, stretching long shadows under the rows of cars. Kendrick cut the engine and exhaled sharply. He hated being late. Discipline and punctuality weren't just habits for him, they were the foundation of his life as a federal prosecutor. But today, the world had conspired against him. His polished navy suit and crisp white shirt betrayed nothing of the chaos that had consumed his morning. Only minutes earlier, an urgent phone call had forced him to review a last-minute motion on a human trafficking case. He'd handled it with the sharp precision his career demanded, but it had cost him precious time. Now he was walking into unfamiliar territory. Municipal court. This wasn't supposed to be complicated. His case was personal, not federal. A dispute over a property tax adjustment on the home his grandmother left him. The city had inexplicably raised the taxes, and Kendrick had gathered weeks of proof to show the error. But the house wasn't just property. It was the anchor of his childhood, the place where his grandmother had taught him right from wrong. As he grabbed his briefcase, his phone buzzed again. A text from his assistant. The judge in Greenville has a reputation for being tough on latecomers. Be careful. Kendrick tucked the phone away. He wasn't worried. He had the truth, the evidence, the facts. But as he stepped onto the courthouse steps, something in the air felt different. Heavy. Watching. What Kendrick didn't know yet was that this ordinary morning would ignite a chain of events that would shake the very foundation of Greenville's justice system and turn him into the center of a battle far larger than a tax dispute. But why was Kendrick about to be singled out in a way no one else in that courtroom was? Stay with me, because this story only gets darker from here. The courthouse doors opened with a faint groan, releasing a wave of stale air that smelled of old paper and burnt coffee. Kendrick stepped inside, his polished shoes clicking against the scuffed tile floor. This was nothing like the gleaming federal courts he was used to. The beige walls were tired, the wooden benches marked by decades of restless hands and anxious waiting. The place hummed with life. People shuffled down narrow hallways, clutching folders stuffed with citations, disputes, or desperate appeals. Their faces carried a quiet tension. Parking tickets, zoning issues, small claims. To them, this building held power over the fragile balance of their lives. Kendrick checked his watch. 8:50 a.m., 10 minutes. Barely enough time to find the right room. He followed faded signs until his eyes landed on a brass plate. Room 204, Judge Charles Whitman. He paused, adjusted his tie, then entered. The room was already filling with bodies. A few whispered. A few sat stone-faced, eyes glued to the floor. Kendrick slipped into a seat near the back, unfolding his folder to review his evidence one last time. Moments later, the atmosphere shifted. The door behind the bench opened, and a tall man with silver hair strode in. Judge Charles Whitman. His blue eyes swept the room with surgical precision, sharp and unforgiving. Without a word, he commanded silence. All rise. The bailiff's voice echoed. Everyone stood, the scrape of benches reverberating through the chamber. Kendrick rose too, posture straight, but he couldn't ignore the cold weight of the judge's stare. This was no ordinary small-town judge. This was a man who radiated authority, who missed nothing. Kendrick knew discipline. He knew preparation. But something about Whitman's gaze told him the real trial wasn't going to be about property taxes. And in less than 30 minutes, Kendrick would find himself caught in a confrontation that no one else in that room dared to face. The shuffle of feet quieted as Judge Whitman settled into his chair. His gavel struck once, sharp and commanding. One by one, he began calling cases, his tone clipped, efficient and utterly detached. Kendrick observed closely. A middle-aged man in a wrinkled suit slipped in late, almost unnoticed. Moments later, a young woman in jeans and a hoodie entered quietly, phone in hand. Neither drew so much as a glance from the judge. Kendrick made a mental note but turned his focus back to the folder in his lap. Property records, assessment charts, photographs. He had laid out every detail with meticulous care. He reminded himself, this is simple. Present the evidence. Correct the error. Go home. But the air in the room was thick with something else. Fear. Deference. People stood before Whitman like children caught in mischief, voices trembling, shoulders hunched. He listened briefly, then delivered rulings that landed like heavy stones. Fines, penalties, warnings. Kendrick's name hadn't been called yet. He glanced at the clock. 9:15 a.m. Barely a breath later, the bailiff's voice rang out. Case of Kendrick Robinson. The room turned. Kendrick gathered his folder and rose, every step deliberate as he approached the podium. His face calm, but his heart measured. He'd done this 1,000 times before in higher courts against tougher opponents. Yet as Judge Whitman's eyes locked onto him, the temperature seemed to drop. The judge's expression hardened, colder than it had been for anyone else. "You're late, Mr. Robinson," Whitman said, his voice slicing through the silence. "Do you think this court's time is less valuable than your own?" A ripple of unease swept across the benches. Kendrick straightened, meeting the judge's gaze head-on. He had no idea yet. This was only the beginning of a confrontation that would ignite something far bigger than himself. Kendrick lifted his hands slightly, palms open in respect. "Your Honor, I apologize for the delay. I was attending to urgent federal matters." The judge cut him off like a blade through glass. "Excuses do not excuse tardiness. This court operates on order and respect. If you cannot follow that, perhaps you should reevaluate your priorities." A hush fell. Dozens of eyes bore into Kendrick, some sympathetic, others curious. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Your Honor, I understand the importance of timeliness. If I may, I'd like to present my case regarding the property tax adjustment." Whitman leaned forward, his glare unrelenting. "We'll get to that. But first, contempt." His gavel struck once. "You are fined $750. The sound echoed like a gunshot. A collective murmur rippled through the courtroom. Kendrick's heart pounded, not with fear, but with recognition. This punishment was extreme, out of proportion, and undeniably selective. He glanced toward the woman in jeans, the man in the wrinkled suit. Both had slipped in late, both unscathed, yet he alone had been singled out. Kendrick bowed his head slightly, masking the storm building behind his calm eyes. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said quietly, retreating to his seat. But as he opened his folder again, his pen began to move, capturing every detail. This wasn't just about taxes anymore. A new case was being built, and Whitman had just handed him the first piece of evidence. Kendrick sat silently, but his mind raced. The fine wasn't about tardiness. It was a message, a warning. Judge Whitman moved on, calling the next case with a smile that hadn't been there moments ago. A young man approached nervously, stumbling through his explanation. Whitman listened patiently, even offering a small chuckle before issuing a mild warning. The contrast was undeniable. For one, leniency. For Kendrick, punishment. Kendrick scribbled quick notes in the margin of his folder. Pattern. Disparity. Bias. His pen underlined each word with force. "Mr. Robinson," the bailiff called suddenly, "you may present your evidence." Kendrick rose again, steady but sharp, walking back to the podium. He spread out his documents, property records, maps, and assessment reports, each meticulously prepared. "Your Honor, these records demonstrate a clear error in valuation. The property was assessed at nearly double its market rate." Whitman raised a hand. "Mr. Robinson, spare us the lecture. This court is not interested in your opinions. Stick to the facts." Kendrick's lips curved into the faintest smile. "The facts are all I have, Your Honor." For a second, their eyes locked again, one man standing on law, the other on power. And in that brief silence, Kendrick felt it. The crack in Whitman's mask. Whitman's gavel tapped twice, sharp and deliberate. "Mr. Robinson, I warned you once about your tone. This courtroom will not become your lecture hall." Kendrick didn't flinch. He slid another document forward. "Then let's stay with numbers. Here, 3 nearby properties nearly identical, all assessed at 40% lower. That's not an opinion. It's a record. The courtroom murmured again. A few heads nodded, eyes shifting from Whitman to Kendrick. The judge's face tightened. Enough. Your comparisons are irrelevant unless entered properly into evidence. Kendrick raised an eyebrow. They are entered, Your Honor. Filed last week. Page 12 of the docket. Whitman froze, caught off guard for a fraction of a second before regaining his composure. Regardless, I am not persuaded. Your attitude alone undermines your credibility. A wave of silence followed. Kendrick closed his folder slowly, his calm voice carrying across the room. My credibility, Your Honor, comes from truth. Whether it's welcomed here or not is another matter. Gasps rippled through the benches. Whitman's eyes blazed, gavel slamming down with a thunderclap. One more word out of line, and I'll hold you in contempt again. Kendrick stood tall, locking eyes with him, unshaken. The battle lines were now unmistakable, and every soul in that courtroom felt it. Judge Whitman leaned back in his chair, voice dripping with disdain. Mr. Robinson, you parade yourself as some kind of crusader, but this court runs on order, not on theatrics. Do you think you're the first man to cry injustice here? A few chuckles rose from the front row. Whitman's loyal onlookers, attorneys who knew better than to challenge him. Kendrick didn't rise to the bait. He opened his folder once more, pulling out a thin, weathered letter. With respect, Your Honor, this isn't a performance. It's history repeating itself. This is a letter from your own court clerk signed, dated last year, admitting the same valuation error for a different property owner. That owner just happened to look different than me. The room went silent. Eyes widened. Even the bailiff shifted uneasily. Whitman's jaw stiffened. Irrelevant. You're wasting this court's time. Kendrick laid the letter on the bench. The court's time is the people's time, Your Honor. And the people deserve consistency. From the benches, someone muttered, He's right. Another voice echoed softly, Yeah. Whitman's gavel slammed. But this time the sound didn't silence the room. It only underscored what everyone was beginning to see. The cracks weren't just in his mask anymore. They were spreading across the entire courtroom. Whitman's voice thundered, louder than before. Enough of this nonsense. You think you can stroll into my courtroom, wave around selective papers, and smear the integrity of this bench? I will not allow it. His face flushed red, gavel hammering so violently the sound echoed like gunshots. Several spectators flinched. Kendrick remained still, hands folded, gaze steady. With respect, Your Honor, no one is smearing the court. I'm showing facts. If facts tarnish this bench, perhaps the problem isn't the man presenting them. The words hung heavy. Gasps rippled through the room. Whitman shot up from his chair, pointing at Kendrick. Contempt. You will not challenge me in front of this gallery. But the gallery was no longer silent. Whispers spread, louder now. A current Whitman couldn't stop. People leaned toward each other, nodding, murmuring words like unfair and truth. Kendrick's calm voice rose above the noise. I don't need to challenge you, Your Honor. The truth is doing that on its own. The gavel struck again, but this time it sounded less like authority, more like desperation. Whitman's lips curled in fury. This hearing is over. Bailiff, clear the courtroom. But his command only deepened the tension. Instead of rising, the audience leaned forward, unwilling to miss what came next. The bailiff hesitated, eyes flicking between Whitman's rage and the crowd's restless energy. Kendrick's voice cut through. With respect, Your Honor, you cannot end this proceeding without a ruling. And if you walk away now, every person here will know it wasn't justice that guided you. It was fear. The gallery erupted in murmurs. A reporter scribbled frantically. Someone pulled out a phone. Whitman slammed the gavel again, but the sound no longer silenced. It provoked. His authority, once absolute, now trembled in the air. Kendrick calmly lifted another document. Before you silence this court, perhaps the public should see the financial disclosure you signed 2 months ago. The same period my case was dismissed without review. A stunned hush swept across the room. Whitman froze, hand tightening on the gavel, but no words came. For the first time, the judge wasn't in control. Whitman's voice shook, no longer steady but sharp with panic. "You insolent fool. Do you think waving papers makes you credible? You are nothing. In this court." The gallery recoiled. Some gasped, others whispered. The calm, commanding judge they once feared now looked desperate, unhinged. Kendrick stayed composed, letting the silence expose Whitman's outburst. "If I am nothing, Your Honor, then why does this document make your hands shake?" Whitman slammed the gavel, but his hand trembled. "Bailiff, remove him now." The bailiff stepped forward, but paused, eyes flicking toward Kendrick, then the restless audience. The room was no longer Whitman's to command. Kendrick lifted his voice just enough for all to hear. "This is bigger than me, Judge. The people here, your people, are watching. Every word you speak now shows them who you truly are." The gallery murmurs swelled into a wave. Phones recorded, eyes locked on Whitman. For the first time, the robe looked less like a shield and more like a costume slipping apart. Kendrick spread the final set of papers across the table, his voice steady but razor sharp. "Here it is, bank transfers, property deeds, signatures, all tied to the corporations your rulings conveniently favored. Every line, every dollar traced back to you." The courtroom froze. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching furiously. Camera phones zoomed in. Whitman's face drained of color. That's inadmissible hearsay, fabrications." His words tumbled over each other, weak and frantic. Kendrick didn't flinch. "These aren't whispers, Judge. These are records. Certified, cross-checked, and every copy is already secured outside this courtroom. Even if you strike them here, the truth has already left this building." Gasps echoed. A woman in the gallery whispered, "He's finished." Whitman gripped the bench, knuckles white. His gavel sat useless beside him. For the first time, he looked small, trapped by the very law he once wielded like a weapon. Kendrick stepped closer, lowering his voice so it carried like steel. "You can deny me, but you can't deny the people. And today, they see you." Whitman lurched to his feet, the robe flowing but no longer majestic, only frantic. "This court is mine. I am the law here." His voice cracked, echoing through the chamber. The gallery erupted shouts, gasps, even laughter at the absurdity. Order was gone. Whitman slammed his palms on the bench. "Bailiff, arrest him. Arrest all of them if you must." But the bailiff stood frozen, glancing between Kendrick and the restless crowd. The power Whitman once commanded no longer carried weight. Kendrick held his ground, calm, steady. "You've mistaken fear for respect, Judge. And fear has a short memory. Respect, true respect, comes from truth. Something you've long abandoned." Whitman's eyes darted wildly, searching for an ally. None met his gaze. Even the court stenographer had stopped typing, watching him unravel. His words stumbled into a whisper. You can't take this from me," Kendrick answered, his voice cutting clean through the chaos. "You already took it from yourself." The crowd roared, and in that moment, the courtroom no longer belonged to Whitman. The gavel slipped from Whitman's trembling hand, clattering onto the floor. The sound echoed like a final verdict. His shoulders sagged, the authority drained from him. He looked less like a judge, more like an old man cornered by his own sins. The gallery quieted, sensing the shift. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every second of his undoing. Whitman sank back into his chair, muttering to himself. "All I did, all I built, for nothing?" His words were cracked, defeated. Kendrick didn't gloat. He stood tall, steady, his silence more powerful than any speech. Reporters scribbled furiously. One whispered, "This is history." Whitman's eyes glistened, though whether with rage or tears, no one could tell. He covered his face with his hands, as if to shield himself from the truth now written across the room. For the first time in decades, the bench no longer belonged to him. It belonged to justice. The chamber doors burst open. Officials from the State Judiciary Board filed in, flanked by security. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing history in motion. One officer approached the bench. "Judge Whitman, by order of the State Ethics Commission, you are hereby suspended pending removal." Gasps filled the gallery. Cameras clicked like gunfire. Whitman lifted his head slowly, disbelief etched in every wrinkle. "You dare remove me? Here? In my courtroom?" His voice cracked on the last word. The lead commissioner stood firm. "It was never yours. It belongs to the people, and they've spoken." Whitman's robe, once a symbol of untouchable power, now looked heavy, burdensome. He gripped it tightly, as if cloth could anchor him to authority already slipping away. From the gallery, someone shouted, "Justice at last!" The cry was met with thunderous applause. Whitman looked around, desperate for a single ally. None stood with him. Kendrick remained silent, letting the moment swallow the man who had once seemed invincible. Whitman slammed his fist against the bench, the echo silencing the cheers. His face burned crimson, veins rising in his neck. "I will not be stripped of my seat like some petty criminal," he roared. "This court bends to me. I've ruled it for decades, and no commission, no officer, no outsider will dictate otherwise." Security stepped forward, but he thrust out his hand. "Touch me, and you'll regret it." His robe swirled as he rose, trying to summon the old commanding presence. But it faltered. His voice shook. His legs wavered. The crowd watched, half in fear, half in grim satisfaction. The man who had silenced so many now raged like a trapped beast. Kendrick's gaze was steady. "This isn't strength, Whitman. It's desperation." For a moment, the judge froze, hearing the truth in the words. His breath came ragged, chest-heaving. Yet pride held him upright. "I will not leave this bench. They'll have to drag me off." Two officers advanced toward the bench. Their measured steps echoed through the chamber, louder than Whitman's ragged breathing. "Stand down," Whitman barked, pointing at them like they were wayward clerks. "I command this court." But the officers didn't halt. The authority in his words rang hollow. Desperate, Whitman turned to the gallery. "You've all come to see me humiliated. But remember, I kept order. I punished criminals. Without me, chaos will swallow this city." Some murmurs rippled, but no one rose in his defense. Even his former allies avoided his eyes. The officers reached him. One extended a hand. "Sir, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Whitman's reply was a guttural snarl. He clutched the edge of the bench, knuckles white. "This is my seat. You'll have to tear it from me." The officers seized his arms. Gasps filled the chamber as the once feared judge was wrenched from his throne, robes tangling around his legs. His furious cries echoed through the hall, but his words carried no weight anymore. Kendrick stepped forward, his calm presence towering above Whitman's chaos. Power taken by fear always ends the same way, dragged into the light. Whitman's shouts rang through the courthouse corridor as officers escorted him away. "You'll regret this. Every one of you will regret it. The law is mine. I built it." Spectators pressed against the walls, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others whispering in awe at the spectacle. His voice cracked as he continued, trying to reclaim some shred of authority. "Kendrick Robinson, you think you've won? I'll have every case overturned. Every ruling you touch." Kendrick, standing calm near the entrance, didn't respond. His gaze followed Whitman with a quiet intensity, like a storm observing a tree bending in the wind. The officers kept a firm grip. Whitman kicked and twisted, but each movement only emphasized how powerless he had become. Outside, the bright morning sun highlighted the contrast. The man who once ruled the courtroom like a kingdom was now just another citizen, escorted past the stunned crowd. A murmur rippled through those left behind. Justice, for once, had arrived, unflinching and undeniable. Kendrick exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle, knowing this was far more than a personal victory. It was a turning point for the entire system. The courtroom, once tense and silent, buzzed with disbelief and relief. Clerks exchanged glances, their fingers hesitating over keyboards, suddenly aware of the shift in power. Mrs. Thompson, the longtime court clerk, let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "It's finally over," she whispered to the bailiff, James Wilson, who nodded slowly, eyes moist with years of suppressed frustration. Law students who had been observing sat wide-eyed, pens flying as they scribbled notes. The young woman in the corner looked at Kendrick with newfound admiration, whispering to her friend, "Change isn't just a word, it's happening." Reporters fanned out, recording statements, capturing the mix of fear, awe, and hope. Even defendants waiting for their hearings felt the weight lift. Today, they had seen that justice wasn't just a concept, but a reality that could be defended. Kendrick gathered his briefcase, scanning the room one last time. Each glance told him the same thing. This wasn't just his victory. It belonged to everyone who had endured silence, bias, and injustice. A subtle smile crossed his face. The work wasn't done, but the first stone had been cast. And for the first time in decades, the courthouse felt like a place where fairness could breathe. Within days, the courthouse transformed. New policies were posted publicly, bias training for judges and staff became mandatory, and oversight committees were established to monitor fairness in every decision. Community members gathered in small groups, discussing the changes with cautious optimism. Activists who had protested outside now met with court officials, offering suggestions and feedback. The energy was electric, hopeful, and determined. Kendrick met with law students, young attorneys, and clerks, emphasizing that reform wasn't just about one judge. It was about changing a system that had long ignored inequality. "This isn't the end," he reminded them. "It's a beginning. Every voice matters. Every action counts." National media picked up the story. Across the country, other courthouses began reviewing their procedures. The hashtag #EqualJusticeNow trended, while letters poured in from people inspired to stand against systemic bias in their own communities. Even the courthouse staff felt the shift. James Wilson led bias awareness sessions for officers. Mrs. Thompson mentored clerks in ethical practices. Each small act reinforced that change wasn't symbolic. It was real, practical, and irreversible. The seeds Kendrick planted that morning were taking root, and the garden of justice was starting to bloom. Months later, Kendrick stood in the renovated courthouse, the sunlight spilling across freshly painted walls. Judges, clerks, and law students filled the room, their faces reflecting anticipation, hope, and gratitude. He approached the podium, glancing briefly at the plaque near the entrance. "Equal justice is everyone's right." A small smile tugged at his lips. The journey had been long, exhausting, but meaningful. "Justice isn't just about laws," Kendrick began, his voice warm and steady. "It's about dignity, fairness, and ensuring every person knows they matter. Change begins when we stand up, speak out, and demand what is right." Applause filled the room, but Kendrick's focus was on the young faces. The students, the clerks, the attorneys, those who would carry the fight forward. A young law student approached afterward, notebook in hand. "You've shown us that the law isn't just rules, it's people," she said. Kendrick nodded, humbled. "Listen to every voice, fight for fairness, and never underestimate the power of a single act standing for justice." Outside, Greenville's streets bustled as always, but inside, a courthouse once marked by bias now radiated hope. The fight wasn't over, but a seed had been planted. And for Kendrick, for the community, for the future, it was enough to keep moving forward.